Hey guys, today I'm going to be doing a book review on The Charmed Wife by Olga Grushin. In The Charmed Wife by Olga Grushin, Cinderella and her Prince Charming have been married for 13.5 years. But things have gone from perfect to disastrous. Going to a witch for help, Cinderella intends to wish for the death of her husband. The Charmed Wife is about the truth and lies of romance and marriage, and the realities of what qualifies to make a happily ever after. So, this book, yeah guys, this was a very interesting book. And to be quite honest, I didn't know how to feel about it for the longest time while I was reading it. Because while I was reading it, I kind of kept changing my views and my opinions, like, okay, am I going to rate this book 2 stars? Am I going to rate it 3 stars? Am I going to rate it 4 stars? And the thing is, once I finally finished the book, and I got the entirety of the story and things made sense, I felt like this book, for me personally, this is definitely not going to be for everybody, but for me personally, I was like, okay, I think this is a 4-star book for me, because I ended up rather liking it in some ways, and it's very difficult to explain without going into spoilers, because yeah, this is definitely a non-spoiler review. But yeah, for the longest time while I was reading this book, I just was not really, because I was still enjoying it to some degree. I was still enjoying it to some degree, but at the same time I was just feeling rather disappointed with it, because just the narrative choices, the direction the book kind of took sometimes on occasion, sometimes it just wasn't gelling with me. But the thing is, literally, the last 50 pages of this book, and I do mean the last 50 pages of this book, there is a certain twist with the narrative. Like I said, I won't spoil it here. There was a specific twist with the narrative right at that last 50-page mark that really clicked with me and really made me just think totally differently about this book. The twist totally just recontextualized everything I thought I knew about this book, and I kind of loved that. And once again, this twist that does happen in the last 50 pages, I think that's going to be the point in this novel that's going to be hit or miss with readers. You're either going to love it or hate it, just depending on how you've been feeling, I think, up to that point in the novel, if that makes sense. So yeah, the last 50 pages, like I mentioned, the twist with the narrative really just recontextualized everything I thought about this book, how I thought about the narrative, how I thought about the characters, how I thought about the world building. I totally saw everything through a completely different lens, and I seriously really loved that, and it just made this book very different and unexpected in some ways, because I think you're going into this book expecting this to be a straight out, like, traditional Cinderella retelling of sorts, and that's not what this book is. This book is, it's the aftermath, if you will. You know, it's the aftermath of the happily ever after. And Cinderella and her Prince Charming, you think they have everything, you think they love each other, but then you're getting those very harsh realities about what 13.5 years of marriage does to a couple, what it does to an individual. And yet that's what this book is primarily about. You know, it's not really about the happily ever after. The happily ever after is more, what does that mean to you as an individual? What does that mean to Cinderella as an individual, you know, outside of her Prince Charming? So as I mentioned, I was initially having a very difficult time with this book in terms of my level of enjoyment, and yeah, I was getting frustrated, I was getting disappointed, and a lot of my initial feelings about this book, I had those questions and issues because there was just so many weird and odd things going on with the narrative. And once again, it's just so hard to kind of get into the very specific things that were kind of frustrating me about this book, because that would kind of be getting into more spoiler territory, I feel like. But yeah, there's weird things with, you know, why, like time, you know, like physical time, like a clock, you know, a 24-hour time period, or days of the week or whatever, like that type of time. Like time was moving very strangely and oddly in this book sometimes, and it was kind of like, okay, why is it doing that? And there were a lot of moments of you, the reader, questioning reality, like, okay, is what I'm reading right now, is this real? You know, is it this reality, or is this something that's playing out inside of Cinderella's head? Is it fantasy? You know, there's a lot of moments of things like that you, the reader, are really questioning, okay, what exactly am I reading here? And then another strange thing about this book, there's a lot of very strange and odd anachronisms. And what I mean by that, without, like I said, try not to get into spoilers here, what I mean by the anachronisms, because when you're reading this book, because what I was assuming, you know, as I was reading, you kind of assume, you know, that this book is taking place in a reality and a time period that is not our own, if that makes sense. You know, like it's taking place during a different era, and it's not really like our world. It's kind of like a fantasy world almost. You know, you kind of assume that, if that makes sense. But then every so often, Cinderella will mention something. She'll like a good example of this, because you'll have moments where Cinderella will mention like a horse-drawn carriage, or, you know, things that are very like a historical type of thing, if that makes sense. But then at one point in the novel, she mentioned something about a limo, like a limousine, and then you're kind of thrown for a loop as a reader, and it's like, what? A limo? I thought we were like in a different era, in a different world. Why is Cinderella mentioning a limousine? And so you have these very strange and odd moments of anachronisms like that. But then it would go back to Cinderella maybe mentioning like a horse-drawn carriage or something like that. So it was moments like that. The way time is in this book, the way reality is in this book, and then the anachronisms, all of that together just kind of builds up. And it is quite honestly very frustrating while you're reading this book, and it sometimes doesn't make much sense, and it allows Cinderella, who is narrating this book, you know, it allows her to kind of be this very interesting narrator, because is she a reliable narrator or what? What's going on there? So once again, going back to like I said, that last 50 pages of this book, it's that last 50 pages of this book where it clicks, and you're kind of like, oh, I get it now. You know, it's one of those, and it's very clever and interesting, I think. So yeah, I've kind of already touched on this very briefly, you know, some of the themes and messages and things like that about what this novel is exploring. Like I already mentioned, this novel is definitely totally all about the aftermath of the happily ever after, and the harsh realities of romance and marriage. And yes, Cinderella and her Prince Charming, they've been married at the start of this book, it's been 13 and a half years, and yeah, you do get flashbacks. The narrative does kind of go back and forth between kind of the present Cinderella and then like the past Cinderella, you know, at the start of the marriage, essentially right after they've, you know, been freshly married and whatnot. So you kind of have that back and forth being between them being freshly married and then, yeah, now at this point 13 and a half years and whatnot. And yeah, like I already mentioned, the plot synopsis, yeah, Cinderella, she's fed up with her marriage. She's fed up with Prince Charming, and yeah, she goes to this witch out in, you know, the middle of the woods, and she's like, hey, I need you to concoct me a spell or something because I want my man dead. I'm getting tired of him. So yeah, that's kind of the whole back and forth structure of this book, you know, because the book opens and you're pretty much kind of dropped right into that, like, hey, Cinderella, she's not happy. And so it's the point of the flashbacks to get to, okay, why is she not happy? What has her Prince Charming done to strike her ire exactly? So yeah, this whole novel is definitely about the truth and lies, about romance and marriages, and yeah, kind of like, hey, all the Disney movies you've seen, they may be all lovey-dovey and cute and whatnot, but they're all lies. They're all lies at the end of the day because they don't tell you what happens after the fact. And the novel, it's about Cinderella and Prince Charming and, you know, what's been going on during their marriage. They've had children, they've had arguments, they've not seen eye to eye on things. And yeah, why is the marriage falling apart exactly? And the novel is exploring that. Who is at fault in situations like this? Is it the man? Is it the woman? Or is it some combination of both? And some other major themes that are going on in this novel, which were kind of unexpected for me, because like I said, I kind of went into this book, I think a little naively, thinking this was going to be rather fairy tale-like, and this novel is not really like a fairy tale at all, you know. And the novel is definitely exploring Cinderella, who now has depression and anxiety. And one of the big things, she has this whole thing of self-delusion. Self-delusion is one of the biggest, I think, messages and themes going on in this book. And that whole idea of self-delusion really presents some interesting things to the narrative. And of course, you know, because this is supposed to be a modern day feminist version of Cinderella, if you will, and yeah, the whole idea of gender roles are explored in this novel. You know, what Cinderella, what her traditional roles are supposed to be, but she's struggling with that, and yeah, how Prince Charming is treating her and just passing off things to her just because she's a woman and he's the man and he shouldn't be dealing with certain things, you know, apparently. So yeah, this novel is handling and exploring a lot, and I think it all just meshes quite brilliantly by the time you do reach the conclusion of this novel. And you know what this novel is truly exploring at the end of the day, because this is about Cinderella's journey, and that, you know, she needs to learn to be comfortable within her own skin, comfortable with herself and her own, you know, be comfortable with who she's become, be comfortable with, you know, the issues that she has, you know, that she's not perfect. She doesn't have to be perfect, you know. So I love a lot of the things going on in this book. So some quick random observations that I just want to briefly mention here. Be prepared, you guys. Be prepared for the very Game of Thrones cutthroat world of the Mouse Kingdom. Anybody who's seen the original Cinderella cartoon, you know that Cinderella, you know, she has all of those talking mice and whatnot, and they help her make her first dress, and they talk to her and give her advice and wisdom, or they're just there for silliness, you know. So yeah, the mice, there's a pair of mice in here, and they are, you're kind of introduced to them, and there's throughout Cinderella's narrative, every so often there'll be these brief Interludes, where all of a sudden you'll get the point of view of the mice and what's going on. And apparently the Mouse Kingdom, it's pretty brutal and cutthroat, you guys. That's why I say very Game of Thrones like, because there's all sorts of manipulating and power and control going on within the Mouse Kingdom, and it's pretty hilarious. You know, this book, it is very dramatic in some ways, and it has a very dramatic and serious subject matter, but it's also, I think you can see this book as a comedy as well, like a dark comedy, because there are moments that are pretty hilarious in here, like darkly hilarious. And yeah, I think the mice are definitely a great way, you know, they provide a lot of some of the dark comedy in here, and just absurdity. Seriously, some of the things the mice get up to, it's pretty absurd and just wacky and all over the place. And yeah, the interludes, sometimes the interludes could be a little distracting, and sometimes I just didn't care, because sometimes I was like, okay, just go back to Cinderella, I don't care about the mice. But the mice kind of served their purpose, and it allowed some dark levity, if you will. That was pretty funny. Also, you guys, I don't know if it was just me, but I kept getting some Shrek 2 vibes. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but if you've read this book and you've seen Shrek 2, I think you kind of might know where I'm sort of getting at with that. But yeah, there were just some things in here that I was like, oh man, this is making me think of Shrek 2. Very odd and weird, but I kind of was digging it. And then I also loved the side characters of the witch and the fairy godmother, because, you know, in the original cartoon, the fairy godmother pretty much only pops up right there when Cinderella's at her most desperate and at her time of need, you know, and she makes that dress and the pumpkin carriage and, you know, turning the mice into horses and whatnot. You know, that's kind of primarily where the fairy godmother is. But yeah, the fairy godmother is in here quite a bit more. There's a witch character that's in here quite a bit. I loved that dynamic between the witch and the fairy godmother, because it's very like devil and angel on Cinderella's shoulder. You know, the witch being like, hey, I want you to come this way towards the dark side, and then the fairy godmother being like, no, my sweet child, you must go this way and do all the good things and keep your man, you know, he's gonna love you again, you know. So I loved that dynamic with the witch and the fairy godmother, because that was pretty hilarious as well, darkly hilarious once again. So yeah, you guys, that is it for my thoughts and feelings on this book. Overall, I did have some issues with this book, but since I finished the book and I wrote my review and I've had time to think about it, it's one of those books that after the fact, it's like I think about it in a much more positive manner, you know, compared to when I was reading it. I had more negative feelings. But yeah, it's like I feel like I'm just kind of slowly warming up to this book and just really enjoying it more and more once I think about it, and the more and more I'm just understanding it and grasping it, if that makes sense. So yeah, this book, it is, you guys. I don't know how helpful my review is going to be, quite honestly, because I mean, I don't know your personal, you know, thought processes and the things you enjoy or hate. And this book is definitely going to be very hit or miss with certain people, depending on what you're expecting and depending on how you take kind of the big twist that happens right at the last 50 pages. But yeah, for me, I think I really did end up, weirdly enough, enjoying this book once I got it and once I understood it. And yeah, I loved what this book was exploring. Like I said, a big chunk of it is definitely exploring Cinderella's depression and anxiety and her gender roles and her sense of self-delusion, and, you know, and yeah, this marriage that is falling apart with the you know, her Prince Charming and whatnot. So yeah, this book had some very unexpected things, but like I said, the more and more I've thought about it, the more and more I think I'm I love it, and that I'm appreciating it after the fact. So you guys, that is it for my book review on The Charmed Wife. In the comments below, if you have read The Charmed Wife, I would definitely really love to know your more spoilery thoughts about this book. How you thought about you know, the direction this book did ultimately take. You know, was it for you? Was it not for you? So yeah, that's it for this video, you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.